Today I just wanted to give a brief introduction to the Japanese entrepreneurial culture, how the startup ecosystem is around there, and give you some hint about how to do business as a startup with Japanese companies. So let's go directly to the presentation, and I would like to have the session as interactive as possible. I mean, if you have any questions during my presentation, please don't hesitate to write in the chat. And I'm thinking of spending the second half of the session to have QA. So let's start. All right, so I hope everyone can see my screen. Okay. So a bit detailed introduction of myself. So I'm CEO of a company named Edge of Innovation. I'm mainly helping foreign startups come to the Japanese market, but I also doing the other side around, helping Japanese companies going outside. I'm working with around 20 countries, embassies, and other startup entities to help the interaction between the Japanese startup ecosystem and all those different countries. I'm a mentor for different accelerator programs, a Canadian Technology Accelerator, German Startup Accelerator, the Ministry of Awesome, and probably 5 or 6 different accelerator programs right now. I'm also part of the J Startup, which is an association under the Ministry of Economy of Japan, which is targeting to support the Japanese startups to become unicorns. And I'm also working with one of the big startup city in Tokyo named Shibuya. I'm their global ambassador to promote their Shibuya startup support to help foreign startups come to the Japanese market, especially into Shibuya. And I'm also part of the French Tech, which is the French side of the government support for startups. And I'm the board member of the French Tech Tokyo. So I'm working with quite a lot of government entities to support the growth of the startup ecosystems. And before COVID, I used to run a place named Edge of, which was a building of 8 floors with event space, co-working, rooftop bar, and the media lounge, etc. And it was a place of gathering for any kind of innovators from all around the world. Many startups for sure, but we also have a lot of artists, media, large corporations. In 2 years, we've received more than 15,000 people. And we received the visit of different ministers, the king and queen from Sweden, etc., etc. So it was really like the big hub of international relationship of the ecosystem for the Japanese startups. By the way, my virtual background used to be the basement of that building where we had this tea room with a secret Japanese garden with an artificial sun on the ceiling, etc. So really, we were trying to create this network of innovators, and this is how I'll grow my connection with all the innovators and startup entities. So after the COVID, we shut down the building, but I'm continuing all my activities online, which actually allow me to be part of kind of events like today. So I'm having a lot of presentations in front of different accelerators all around the world, and try to help those startups from outside to understand different characteristics of the Japanese market and try to help them elaborate the market entry strategy for them. So was my personal introductions. Let's go to about the startup ecosystem of Japan. So just to let you know that the Japan, we are still the 3rd biggest country in the world in terms of GDP. However, we didn't grow. Like almost 30 years now, it's been flat. There isn't any growth of GDP for almost 30 years. And I still remember the price when I was a kid, some things were more expensive than now, so really like you can really feel in the daily life that we have super slow GDP growth. And when you look at the annual wages, it even decreased a bit. You can see the New Zealand wage in year 2000 was around $30,000 a year, and now apparently you guys are receiving more than $40,000 in average. But in Japan, it didn't change for 20 years. And when you look at the young generation, they're even receiving less. So the fact that the economy is not growing is one of a core issue of the Japanese market. And behind this, there is a very difficult cultural reason, is that Japanese people don't like to take risk, and they do not want to start new businesses. So this graph shows the percentage of people who are not interested in starting a business. So Japan may have an image of innovative country, but that's more about technologies researchers done inside big corporates or universities, and it's not about startups. So the entrepreneurial culture in Japan is very, very low. I'd say it's not that active compared to most of Occidental countries. And this is a graph which shows the fear of failure index. So the more you go on the right side, it shows how high the fear of failure is. And the higher you go, it shows the desire to start new business. So you can clearly see that Japan, they are very afraid of starting anything, and they don't want to have their own business. And the comparison is quite interesting when you compare to China, which is a country just next to Japan. They are afraid, but still very motivated to start a new business. So you can see this big gap of mindset. And there's one thing I would like you all to remember, because that's very crucial if you want to do business with Japanese people. Very important to remember that. You probably have seen that kind of picture somewhere before. It's a very famous harakiri, which means that the samurai, the old soldier, when they did any mistake, they had to cut their guts themselves and suicide. So there was not an execution. They had to kill themselves, right? And that's very symbolistic to show how serious the concept of responsibility is in Japan. And a lot of people may think that Japanese don't like to take risk, and actually it's a bit different. Japanese people don't like to be responsible because it's too much of weight to carry. So really, like the sense of responsibility is so strong. If you fail once, it's almost like a game over. Like for example, Trump became president after going 3-time bankruptcy or something, right? But in Japan, you go bankruptcy once, you probably won't come back to the society anymore. And the bank loans, if you are CEO of a company, you try to get money from the bank as a loan, and your company go bankrupt, the bank will come up to the CEO personally to recover all the loans. So really, like Japanese society is designed in a way that if you try to do something, you have to be super responsible about it. And that's at any layers. Within the company, if you try to start a new project, if you fail, then this record will follow you the whole career in this company. So if you deal with Japanese people, it's going to help you understand their behavior. If you keep in your mind that they're afraid of the responsibility. So maybe some of you have experienced communication with Japanese companies trying to sell your technology, but maybe you faced a situation where they will ask you so many questions. Like they absolutely want to make sure that your technology works, where it has value in the market, etc. And this is because if they decide to use a technology or sign a contract with a company which doesn't have any track record yet, they will be extremely responsible about the decision they've made. And if it fails, then they will have to cover everything themselves. So Japanese people takes a lot of time to decide anything, or will ask you the same thing again and again and again, or they want to have a lot of documents to make sure it works, etc. And this is the whole everything behind those behaviors is that they are afraid of the responsibility. So that's the very important key to remember if you want to deal with Japanese companies. And now going to the landscape of the ecosystem. So that's the number of unicorns. And US, the number one in terms of GDP, China number two, Japan is supposed to be the number three. You can clearly see that the number of unicorns is extremely low compared to other countries. And this is, of course, because by definition, Japanese people don't want to be responsible by starting a new business. So the number of startups are very low. But it's also because unicorn, the definition of it is companies worth more than $1 billion before IPO. And in Japan, going IPO is so easy. Startups tend to go IPO before becoming a unicorn. And that's also a reason why the number is so low. And I will come back on that point later. But anyway, the structure of the ecosystem is not allowing enough the startup to grow as fast as they could in the US or China. But obviously the government is trying to do a lot of effort. The amount of investment is increasing. We are starting to see more and more big financial round of several tens of millions of dollars. J Startup, the organization I've mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, it's an organization under the Ministry of Economy, which targets to grow unicorns in Japan. They are providing different support to the Japanese startups. Whenever there is international conventions such as the CES in Las Vegas or the Web Summit, the J Startup is paying the whole exposition fee and bring Japanese startups to do the promotion of it. They are allowing Japanese startups, even small size, to have contract with the government, etc. So the J Startup is the initiative of the Japanese government to help the J Startup. But they are also trying to build a new visa that might be more interesting for you here today. So they are starting the entrepreneurial visa, which will allow foreigners to stay in Japan for 1 year. And they have 1 year to prove that their business model would work and they are capable of launching a company in Japan. And also there are other kind of supports provided, the J Startup, and there are different ecosystems too. Unfortunately, the building of EdgeOf is gone, but we still have this network and the presence in the virtual way. The Venture Cafe, if you ever have the opportunity to come to Japan, that's definitely one of the best community to hang out if you are trying to build network in Japan. One of the very rare English-speaking community which connects big companies and startups. Plug and Play, among many, I think there are about 130 different accelerator programs right now in Japan open to foreign startups. But Plug and Play is probably the best in the kind, in the sense that most of their stuff are bilingual. So they can support fully participants from overseas. After a year of COVID, they acquired quite good experience dealing with companies who are not physically in Japan. And they have one of the top network with large corporations who are looking for open innovation. Like how Plug and Play works, it's probably there is a Plug and Play in New Zealand too. The idea is that Plug and Play as a platform will train startups to create open innovation project with large corporation. And especially in Japan, having that kind of support is very, very helpful. And one suggestion to anyone here is try to participate to those accelerator programs to open your first door to get to the Japanese market. That's very, very useful. And another thing, well, I am the global ambassador of the program, so I do a bit of promotion. But Shibuya, this Shibuya is one of the 23 districts of the Tokyo metropolitan government, which is the epicenter of startup, I'd say. This is where you have Google, Mixi, CyberEdge, and Line, DNA, all those big IT-related companies are around the Shibuya area. You have thousands and thousands co-working spaces, so it's very welcome environment for young startups. A lot of VCs, a lot of CVCs, so it's a very active ecosystem of startups there. And the mayor and the deputy mayor are very innovation-friendly people, and they wanted to create a program to support foreign startups come to the Japanese market using this Shibuya program. The idea is that if you try to set up your entity in Japan, the city office will help you for free to set up a bank account, which, by the way, is very difficult for a foreigner. They will also help you find offices, a place to live for the entrepreneur, and they're also providing a year entrepreneurial visa too. So having an English-speaking city office is already a great thing, because the English, it's going to be the big barrier away if you want to deal with the Japanese culture. And so if you have any plan to set up an entity in Japan, Shibuya, it's probably one of the best candidate to as a destination. And also that's one of the reason why the number of unicorns were that low in Japan is because the exit strategy is mainly IPO there. So about 2/3 of startups are going IPO instead of getting acquired. And that's quite impressive if you compare to the US or India, where M&A acquisition is most of the time the exit. Or when you discuss with most of those Silicon Valley startups, they would say, yeah, we are trying to get acquired by Google. But here in Japan, it's no, we are trying to go IPO within 7 years. That's how different it is. And sometimes there are VCs that would ask entrepreneurs to sign a contract when they invest, that they will try everything to go IPO before anything. So that's also a reason why many startups from Japan are not trying to go outside, because their main purpose is to go IPO in Japan first, and they will think about the outside after. And of course, because they don't speak English much, also one of the reasons why they have problem dealing with the outside market. But this facility to go IPO is as easy as like if you're a startup, you have 3 consecutive years of profit with more than $2 or $3 million of sales of profit, you could go IPO. So it's like when I say IPO, it's not as big as the NASDAQ or anything. Very small IPOs, but good enough to make income for the first round VCs or the entrepreneur. And a lot of Japanese angel investors are entrepreneurs who went to IPO. So they are not as rich as Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. Like they have maybe $10 million of wealth, and they become angel investor. They invest into small startups who would stay in Japan, try to target IPO first. So all those things makes the Japanese ecosystem really closed. The economy is still big enough to survive in Japan, but maybe because New Zealand is also an island, you might have the same mindset a bit. But if you don't interact with outside people from the outside, you tend to stay the same, right? The evolution will stop there. So I think this is one of the opportunity of startups coming from the outside, that the Japanese people are evolving very slow because of all those things. And there are a lot of ideas that is starting to become normal outside, but in Japan is not started yet. Just to give you an example, not sure if you have this in New Zealand, but the electric bikes, the kick bikes, electric kick bikes was a big thing in the Silicon Valley, in Europe, Singapore, 3, 4 years ago, I think. And Japan has just started like a month ago to do a little test of it. And it's the first time we're starting to see people using their application to unlock those e-bikes, so it's really slow to change. So if you see a good success use case outside of Japan, you are the first to bring it there. You might have the chance to make it a success in Japan. And also an interesting part of the investment characteristic is that almost half of the investment done to startups are coming from corporates, more exactly the corporate VCs, which means that a CVC, when they invest, they are not investing for capital gain, right? They invest because they like your technology, because they believe that your technology is useful for their core business, which means that any company who are sure that they have a great product, they have a great technology, but not sure about the business model of it, Japan might be an interesting market to see if you can find a big company who would invest to your startup for the technology because they want to use it in their own company. And unfortunately, Japan don't acquire much, but they're ready to invest as an outside CVC. So, for example, Toyota, the biggest car manufacturer in Japan, they're starting to invest a lot into startups. And so, one strategy to deal with Japanese investors, instead of targeting VCs, try to go see CVCs who might be easier to have a discussion with. And if any of you have an office in Silicon Valley, many of the Japanese big corporates has satellite investing structure in Silicon Valley. So instead of dealing directly with the Japanese mother company, much easier to discuss with those satellite offices in Silicon Valley. And one of the reasons behind it is that Japanese companies have so many cash into the bank account, they don't know what to do with it. And so that's in Japanese yen, but you divide it by 100, it approximately give you the value in US dollars. So as of 2019, I think the number has grew a bit. So we have about 4.8 trillion US dollars in cash in bank accounts. And I'm not including the amount of money that banks have. It's only about the amount of money that corporates have, like Sony or Hitachi or all those big companies. They were so afraid of the Lehman shock and the earthquake, which came 3 years after. They are afraid to make new investments. So they tend to keep the cash in the bank account. They are not growing the salary of their employees. They have more and more cash in the bank account. So even with the negative interest rate now, in Japan, if you keep the money in the bank account, you may lose it. So, and the government is trying to create different initiatives to encourage those companies to invest into startups. For example, if you invest more than $1 million to a startup, you get tax exemption. Maybe we are starting to push those corporate who are afraid to invest for research and development. They don't want to start new business themselves, and they keep the cash in the bank account for nothing. So we're asking them to use it to invest into startups, and very slowly, but we are starting to see that momentum coming in. I think in 2020, we had 400, more than 400 corporate VCs in Japan. So any big company you may have heard the name of, there is a high probability that they have a corporate VC entity. So just to wrap up, and because of the old cultural background, it's extremely important to have a personal relationship first. They have to trust you as a person before you deal about the business conditions or you try to negotiate anything about the contract. And so this is why introductions are extremely important. That's probably one thing similar to any other Asian countries or the Middle East, but especially Japan. If you're introduced by someone who already have this personal relationship with the company, it's going to accelerate the process a lot. Decisions are extremely slow. So again, because they don't want to be responsible, the bigger the company is, more they will try to have a mutual decision within the company. So if you have one person you're negotiating with about your contract, very high is the probability that they will tell you, okay, I will bring back this document, this number to the company, we'll discuss and come back to you. And 2-3 weeks later, after the person spent enough time discussing with the different divisions in the company to make sure that even if it fails, the person won't be pointed out as the sole responsible, then you can go to the next step. And you'll be surprised that sometimes, even if you are discussing directly with the vice president or even the CEO, the decision won't be done at the meeting. So don't be too, don't raise your expectation too high if you have a meeting with a Japanese company. It's not because you have the CEO on the table that the decision will be made right away. Also, it's very important to show concrete use cases. Not sure about New Zealand, but that's especially true with American companies where the great technology, they will come to the meeting, explain about what's good about the tech, and they will expect the corporates to come up with concrete ideas on how to use the technology depending on the business of the company. But in Japan, it's very difficult to expect that. You have to study a bit about the company you are negotiating with, understand the basics of what kind of business or what kind of product they're making. And you are the one who will have to come up with concrete ideas on how to use your startup technology for the company. You have to come up with a concrete proposal. Otherwise, the conversation won't continue. And they will wait, okay, so I understand your tech and what can we do with it? So that's the very common question that will come from Japanese companies. And because of all that, it's very important to find a good partner. And not only for the language, it's true that most of Japanese corporate people don't speak English very well. So you probably will need some Japanese speaking person, but that's not enough. And having an interpreter won't be enough because the negotiation, the conversation should be done in a Japanese way, in the sense that sometimes you are not allowed to say things explicitly, or what I've seen a lot is that a foreign startup do a demo and had a very good feedback during the meeting. The Japanese corporate would say, well, that's great, it's amazing, a lot of compliments, but actually it's a sign of politeness. In Japan, you don't say bad thing, or you tend to overly act to show that you are respecting the person, even if you are not that much interested as a business. So it has to be someone who really knows the culture, the communication way of how the business is done in Japan, and have a network with companies within the business area of what you do. All right, so lots been said. That will be it as a presentation. Thank you very much. Here's my email, or you can find me on LinkedIn. If you have any additional questions after the QA today, I will feel free to let me know.